Mr. Updegrove?
Here.
Mr. Hemingway?
Here.
Present.
Here. Here.
Pledge allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank everybody for coming out tonight. We have our team members, cause that they're going to be late, so they are on the day. Okay, again, we have a couple members who are going to be late, so we're going to, I guess we could still do approval of minutes. Motion to approve minutes. Ms. Werther, and a second by Mr. Updegrove. Aye. What I'd like to do is change our agenda a little bit and move to, instead of human resources, move down to policy and go over the policy first, and then we'll jump back up to the presentation on human resources. Is that okay?
We're going to do policy 913, item number 6 on the agenda, and policy 2020. Ms. Torsia is taking care of a ill family member, but we did not want to delay these. We believe these two policies are, as you receive them, are pretty self-explanatory. The big thing you need to note is that these are updates from PSBA. The dark writing is a new addition that was added by PSBA specifically. We'll start with policy 913, which is a part of 900 community related to non-school organizations and groups and individuals. It is important to note that these two items that were sent forward, updates, which is part of our package with PSBA, they monitor the legislative changes and also anything that needs to happen to keep us in compliance with the law. Policy 913 only applies to requests from non-school organizations. It is intended to address individuals who are not part of the school district organization who request to distribute or post materials. Policy 2020, which we'll touch on next, which is focused on student expression and distribution of policy materials. The significance of policy 913 is that to allow the board to, while they recognize non-school organizations and groups and individuals, it is intended to make sure that those items that they're requesting to be posted or distributed do not really create a disruption to the school environment and or violate any of the required laws. The big bold on the authority also is new language. That again, you receive this, so I'm not going to read the whole thing and insult your intelligence. The definitions are the things that are in dark bold are meant to be highlighted for emphasis purposes, but specifically the prohibited activities and materials, a list that they show, you see things added like obscene, lewd, and vulgar, and profane. Number 6 is a big change with interfere with or advocate interference with the rights of an individual or safe and orderly operation of schools and their programs. And that is intended that while the nexus between if you're doing something that causes a disruption to us being able to effectively run our schools and or interfere with the rights of individuals who are actually participating in school-sponsored activities, whether it be teaching and learning, sports, events, activities, to give us guidelines of how we will approve or disapprove those materials to be posted. And then they go on to define non-school materials. Obviously it's up under the superintendent designee. I will tell you right now, those items typically go to the assistant super of student services in consultation with the principals with regards to what items are approved to be posted in our buildings and on our school property. And again, I'm not going to read the whole thing to you. Any questions that you have about policy 913? Again, the bold are the things that were sent forward by Pennsylvania School Board Association that needed to be updated in that policy. And if not, we are requesting that we move it forward from this committee for approval at the voting meeting later this month.
Ms. Denon?
I might have missed, sorry, I was a little bit late, but is this for first reading, or can we skip the first reading and go right to approval?
This probably needs to go through first reading. Thank you.
Okay, so that we're just approving it for the first reading, okay.
This, and she did tell me it had not come before, so I apologize. She's correct. You all received this in a formal board meeting. And with that being, I will restate the corrected word. Any questions? This is the first reading. We'll bring it back for a second later. Okay. The 220, which I believe is the first time. Again, I'm standing in for Miss Torsia. This is the first time you all received this, so this will be first reading also. Again, policy 220 is focused on student expression and distribution of posted materials. Those items that are in dark print are additional language that was added. When you see the purpose, you'll see the word and maintain a safe and orderly school environment. That was a change from the previous policy. They go on to define distribution, including words like issuing of non-school materials. There's a heavy focus on using the word safety. They go on to define expression to include the word technology. Non-school materials can be printed or things that come through technology resources also, which is an addition that was not there previously. Then in the posting section, I want to point out to you that they are now addressing, again, technology, and include reference to email, text messages, or any other technology delivery. Obviously, that's a broader statement because things are always evolving. That may be something that we may not be aware of yet. And so they've added that language to it. This policy also follows a student if it's our activity off campus. Also that they must adhere to it also. So if they are away representing a school district, it still applies to them. Off campus after school hours posting include, again, technology posting that also may materially or substantially interfere with the educational process. In many ways, that's a language change, but in many ways, there's always been a nexus that you could prove that if it interferes with school, even though it happened outside of school hours, and of course, the strengthening of the language about using our own resources to do that type of thing.
You're up.
Is there any way that people in the audience can see any of this stuff? I don't think there was anything online for them either. I'm sure they would like to see the policies also.
We can have them move over, and I can move that right now, actually, to the public section of it. But you've had this conversation previously about when it's going through the process with the board review first, for first reading, you typically have not done that. So I can, whatever the boards will, because we've had this conversation since I've been here previously.
No, I'm getting confused. You mean we had a conversation where the audience couldn't see it?
There was a conversation previously held about the board having an opportunity to review it and go through their dialogue first before it's put in the public display. But again, it doesn't matter to me, wherever you like.
I personally think that the audience should be able to read it, and people at home, I think they should be. I think I expressed that before. I mean, they have nothing to even go by, or even when they get here, if you don't want to publish it ahead of time, there's nothing they can see to follow along.
I would say, does anybody else have same concern as Ms. Deeroff that we need to discuss? Ms. Denon?
I don't have strong feelings either way about it, but I think the discussion that we had previously, now that we are not, and we weren't printing all these out before we went to computerized, but I think the issue was, and I think that the board has to, everybody has to weigh in and say, as collectively as a board, how we want to do this. But I think what we have been saying is that when we come to these committee meetings, these are somewhat our work sessions to go through these policies and to kind of vet them. And if we as a board have an issue with some of the things that are in these policies, then we as a board of 9 can have a discussion about them. And I think that's why that's why it was made as a board policy that we were not going to have them available prior to the meeting to the public, because they weren't going to be weighing in on these policies at this meeting. They would be weighing in and be commenting on the policies once they come to a board meeting for approval. And that's when they have to be made public. So that was the thinking. That was the thinking behind it. I understand what Mrs. Deeroff is saying, that she would like the public to have an opportunity to look at this now so they can weigh in. That's going to have to be a board decision that we're all going to have to decide if we're going to allow public comment at the end, where the public is going to weigh in on what we are doing in this meeting. And again, I don't care either way, but I think we have, as a board, have to decide what the policy is going to be, and we need to stick to it.
Well, I think you have other comments, but I want to remind the board that what I was referring to, Ms. Denon referred to, is that the public has a chance before you actually vote. This was your chance to make any changes or modifications to focus on what you all want or concerns, and then we release it publicly. Again, as said then, we'll do whatever you want at that point. But it doesn't mean that they will never have a chance to see it prior to the vote. Because on items that are on the agenda for them to comment on. So again, it doesn't matter. We just need to know what you want so that we don't revisit this over and over again on how you want this done.
Mr. Brophy?
Once again, I have no strong feelings either on this, but I guess for transparency reasons, and we do have people that show up to this meeting, it wouldn't hurt if they could look at it before they get here. They're not going to comment on it until after we talk about it, which is later. They could weigh in. I guess I have no strong feelings either way, but these people are taking their time to come to this meeting. I think we should give them, information to be at the meeting with. That's just my feeling.
Yeah, similar to some of what's already been said, we did have this conversation before, and we walked through the different steps. We've got a first reading, there's a second reading, then there's the adoption. So there are numerous times and possible changes to it throughout that process, where there are opportunities for people to see and read and comment on the actual substance of the policy. Given that we have them in advance of the meeting, I'm not opposed to us having them posted publicly. I don't think that doesn't seem like that would be a substantial, significant change, and I'd be in favor of us putting them out ahead of the meetings.
Mr. Updegrove?
I agree on that. I think the public should be aware of it. I mean, because this is just basically, we just have to police all this before we put it up, is what it boils down to.
Ms. Denon?
So if the majority of us seem to want to put this out there, can we just then go ahead and say we want to put it out there, and can you just put it on there so then we could continue? Or do we have to do something else? Can you just do it so people can get it and they
We
can look
can,
at it?
because you can't vote. It's really just getting a
Okay, so
consensus, because you
could-
can't vote in this meeting.
Could we just do that now then,
Yeah.
so then we can just move on?
Yeah, I agree. If we can amend that so that it becomes public right away. Mr. Foos?
Yeah, so I guess generally for policy updates, we'll plan to just have them posted for public view once the agenda is prepared.
They're there. Thank goodness for technology. So to close out, if there are no concerns or comments, this is just first reading. They're sitting there in public, so anyone who logs in will be able to see them through any just regular public access. The final item is item C. Just a heads up, part of what you will be getting today in the HR section, this is just to let you know that whatever moves forward for approval on February 28th could impact policy 008, which is an organizational chart, which will require us to make an update with that during the, was that the 20, what day was that? The 21st? February 21st, I think, meeting where anything that you approve on that date based on the presentation night will also require you to do approval for policy 008. What we do need is, because that it does not, I believe, require first reading, you need to be in compliance with your organizational chart to make you aware that would have to go forward also if you move forward with making any correct approval of positions based on tonight's presentation and changes.
Okay, with that being said, we're going to back up. Hey, hi, Lisa. We're going to back up to item 5, human resources, and Dr. Kim is going to do that presentation.
Mr. President, for you, Chairman, to do that, can you make a note at 7:21 that she joined us for the record and for the minutes? And I did not catch what time Mrs. Denon walked in. Okay, you did get it? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Hemingway, and everyone. Let's just see, I'm multitasking. Okay, so I thought we were going to start with the HR agenda for items first, so I did put an agenda. So as you can see, there are a number of discussion/action items that we're going to have tonight, along with some, staffing change updates as well. So one of the things that we actually want to bring out too is that the reinstitution of supportive supervisory group. If some of the board members who were here as board members a couple of years ago, and the community may recall that I believe it was until June of 2018 that we have Ag 93. We have the BAEA for professionals, and we also had, at that time, supportive supervisory group. that was what one might call a mid-level management group, and at that time, from my recollection, that we had an interim superintendent who had moved everyone who was at that time part of supportive supervisory group plan into EC 93. In July 1 of 2018, all those group members became EC 93 groups. So part of the presentation is to, explain to you the situation that we as a district and administration is facing, and, our proposal for, reinstituting that particular supportive supervisory group. And so the rationale is that, I think certainly it's not just me speaking, but as a collective administrative team that we are still challenged by the following needs. As you can see, the needs are that, to support the social and emotional and academic learning of our students, to operate efficiently and effectively, and continue to be fiscally prudent. I mean, I think those three things are huge ticket items that all of us are working on. And on the screen is actually a graphic that kind of illustrates the importance of social and emotional learning. As you can see, social and emotional learning pertains what one would consider to be critical skills that students need to be responsible citizens and to be successful in a changing world, which sort of is part of our, vision and mission. And as you can see, there are 5 important skills: self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, social awareness, and self-awareness, which are really critical for our students to be successful. And to further support the administration's endeavor, again, to support the social and emotional academic learning of our students, to operate efficiently and effectively, and to be fiscally, prudent, And when we looked at our current employees and their responsibilities, the district, the administration recognizes that we currently have employees and a service provider who have been fulfilling many aspects of duties and responsibilities of, what we will be presenting tonight as newly identified positions, and have devoted a significant amount of time outside of their regular schedule to fulfill their current positions. And so with some of those positions, it is really repurposing them, not so much adding a new FTE necessarily, which FTE is a full-time equivalence. So as you can see on the screen, we are talking about a couple of things that the impact that that the supportive supervisory group will have on the district, to make sure that we're operating efficiently and effectively as a collective organization, making sure that our service to the district and its constituents are effective and, again, efficient, providing systemic supervision of safety and security, along with maximizing the district staffing and their skills. And when we talk about safety, we're not just talking about physical safety, we're also talking about, mental well-being, falling under the safety umbrella as well. And that coupled with the social and emotional needs. And so we are giving you a little bit of a preview, and we'll go more into detail with the following slides, but the Supervisor of Student Services and Dean of SEAL, they're 2 separate positions that we are going to discuss. And district school with those 2 positions, district school counselors can focus and dedicate their time to meeting the social and emotional needs of our students, which, as many of you will know, leads to a more successful educational experience for our students. And then, the impact it has on teaching and learning environment. With Dean of SEALs, in particular, 3 large elementary schools. And when we're talking about large elementary schools, we're talking about student enrollment of 550 or more, and some of them, might have specialized programs. where we will have a dean of SEALs that is in full-time support dedicated to working on social, emotional, academic learning needs of our students, so that principals also at those schools can focus on being an instructional leader, because as you can imagine, they are being pulled in so many different ways. And also will have an impact on safety. We are, with our proposal, there's a dedicated supervisor and a point of contact who truly understands the safety and security needs of the district and the public, and provide greater reassurance to the district and its constituents. And all of this will be done under, with our proposal is, under making sure that we are being fiscally prudent, repurposing many of our existing staff. Okay. Again, the positions that we are going to propose tonight under the supportive supervisor plan would be Dean of Social, Emotional, and Academic Learning, Supervisor of Student Services, School Safety Coordinator / School Police Officer, Human Resources Manager, and Communications and Marketing Specialist. So for the before we begin, some of you may recall the data that is presented on the screen that was shared, I believe it was back in early September of 2019. I believe it was one of those finance committee presentations that Ms. Pitts had presented. At that time, the data was taken out of PSBA, which is Pennsylvania School Board Association, where they actually had the data collection of looking at the school districts across the state and looking at ratio of pupil to faculty and also to the management. So according to the PSBA, when they did the study, they included all administrators, both instructional and none. So as you can see, when they looked at school districts that had 4,105 or more pupils, the ratio with management was 286.6 students. We as a district, when we look back in 2018-19, using that data, it was 228.9. Okay, and based on I'm sorry, I apologize. Pupil management according to Pennsylvania was 178. My apologies. According to our district data, it's 228.9. That is using 18-19 enrollment data. And at the time, Ms. Pitts had noted that to match the ratio that's noted on PSBA as the norm across the state, the district would have to add additional 8 to 13 management staff. And certainly that was not our recommendation, but that was just for comparison's sake. And by any means, that's not our recommendation, but just to share with you collectively as a district across the state, that's where we stand. So one of the positions that we are proposing is Dean of Social, Emotional, and Academic Learning, commonly known as Dean of SEAL. Okay. Again, we talked about, I made a reference to 3 elementary schools that have 550 or more students and or specialized programs. They are Boyertown, Gilbertsville, and New Hanover for Fredericks. Those are 3 particular schools that have 550 or more students. At those schools, they...
Dr. Kemp, it is also important to note in those schools that is before we get the final accurate kindergarten count. So those numbers could be larger. And just want to make the board aware that the smallest school that is at 550 something actually will also have one of our district-wide special ed programs housed in that building also, which requires more intensive supervision. But the other 2 schools currently are already over 600 students.
Thank you. That's important to note. Thank you. And so those large schools also have 1 school counselors, and our school counselors, they do an incredible amount of work supporting not only the the needs of the students, the faculty, but also support their building principal, and supporting them in a quasi administrative function. By doing that, those counselors were not able to maximize their service in supporting the students' social emotional needs. And couple that with the principals, with such large student body, they have less time dedicated to being an instructional leader of schools. And if you were to ask any of our building principals in those schools, they will tell you that they wish they could spend more time being true instructional leaders. So with that said, we are proposing Dean of Social, Emotional, and Academic Learning, Dean of SEAL. And, again, we're trying to be very fiscally responsible. And doing so, on the screen, you will see the proposed pay range for that position. It is the position will be working 216 days. The job description was shared with the board on Friday as well. And so 216-day workday equals 190 teacher days plus 26 days that are scheduled with the consultation of the administration. And we are, again, repurposing the FTEs that we have. I'm sorry, Doctor.
I was actually, when you get to that point, if Dr. Barrow come forward, and I think Mr. Rohn is here, come up to the podium, and then Dr. O'Bara with OTL, because Mr. Stout is away, can actually, as Dr. Kim is moving forward, give you more dialogue about the repurposing of other resources to cover the cost of this position. You speak a little bit about the repurposing of repackaging of the position.
Sure.
FTE.
So when we looked at where we were moving our students and where we were prioritizing needs in the right sizing plan, what we did was we looked at what our ratios were for our support staff, our reading specialists, our intervention teachers, our instructional coaches, and how we might be able to repurpose some of those full-time employees into this vein of Dean of SEAL. So that's how we were able to reallocate some of the funding toward the Dean of SEAL positions.
And I do see Craig back there hiding. Can you join Mr. Rohn up here, your colleague? I didn't see you bent down back there. So as you know, that we went into the right sizing process, and one of the things with the social emotional learning was a conversation about the counselor ratio. Through this right sizing process, the other schools actually will now have a ratio of roughly 350 to 1 in their counselor ratio with the smaller schools. The larger schools, as you know, these three still are challenged. And one of the requests that was made, a while ago, was having a person who not only can bring and address the social emotional learning, but also address other issues that they could take off the counselor's plate that they were doing. And, Mr. Rohn and Mr. Kale, if you all could speak to that, the value of the SEAL and why that was a more valuable opportunity rather than just adding another counselor.
With the addition of the SEAL, right now we struggle, at our three larger buildings, helping or being proactive with different issues, different mental health issues, different just social issues with students, because with over 600 students, one counselor and me, it's very hard to be proactive. Unfortunately, we are often reactive to situations that are going on, and we're constantly talking about, what can we do to prevent these things from happening? Because we know that if we can teach students how to behave, how to get along with other people, that's going to be beneficial in the classroom. The problem is with so many students and the two of us, that is almost impossible. We have found it extremely difficult to do.
And Mr. Chairman, I apologize. I didn't see Ms. Petrie. She's blocked from view.
And just to kind of echo what Mr. Rohn had said, I think it's on a regular occurrence where I speak to my counselor who's very good at her job, and we have ideas in terms of how to get her into a classroom to meet the needs and share ideas and do classroom lessons with large numbers of students in a classroom, 20, 25 students. But unfortunately, sometimes the daily needs of our building, there might be an individual student who has an emergency in their life or something that comes up, and those responsibilities to that individual student kind of supersede having that counselor get in front of those students in a classroom. So those lessons may not be delivered in a timely manner because of the needs of the student body. So I think this is an opportunity for us to address that and hopefully be able to meet both sets of needs at the same time, the students that are in the classroom as well as those individual emergencies that happen from time to time in our schools.
And you're not required, Ms. Preacher. I just didn't want to.
I mean,
If you want to, I just didn't see you, and I don't want you to think I was
it's okay.
ignoring
Thank you. No, I mean, the three of us have talked at great length about this, and we have each other on speed dial just to even brainstorm ideas of what's working in all of our buildings. And the time of when we have children in our building is limited, so when we look at how can we reach the kids, oftentimes the day is over. So we really are looking for some supports to be able to, like Brian said, of being proactive and developing those skills at a young age and building a strong foundation. So our hope is that as they progress through our school systems, they have more skills to be able to manage the stressors of life. And as they get older, hopefully they can use those through middle school and then through high school and beyond.
Thank you. I think, I did go back to the earlier slide that shows the graphic. Again, the Dean of SEAL coupled with the school counselors who have more time to meet the needs of the students can focus on teaching our students, being proactive, their self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, social awareness, and self-awareness. With those foundations, as they go through our schools, they're going to be more set up for success as well. So, thank you.
Sorry, Ms. Denon. Ms. Denon?
So basically what you're asking for, I just want to make sure I understand. We have one full-time counselor in each of our three largest elementary schools. And then we have the other elementary schools. Do they not have a full-time counselor at this point?
They only, Washington was only one, but the other two did not. They had half.
So the two smallest schools had half?
Yes.
Okay. Did that include Pine Forge? Had half?
Yes.
Okay. So, so with the closing of Pine Forge and that half-time person, then will all of our elementary schools have at least one full-time counselor?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So in addition to that, then what you're asking for is someone in a management position who is going to basically oversee all of the counselors and pick up the slack. So in other words, this Dean of SEAL would basically be going from like one, going to the different schools. I'm confused what we're asking for.
Is it outlined in the document? There are three deans of SEALs being proposed, one in each of the large buildings.
Okay.
In lieu of, if you remember from the get-go, the counseling ratio that is recommended is 251. In our analysis, we share with you that if you look at the secondary level, we actually have a 350-to-1 ratio. Our other schools are totally out of whack. We literally had 600 and 700-to-1 ratio in our elementary schools. And fiscally, we could not afford to drop down to 250-to-1. We just couldn't do it. But we felt it was reasonable to get every school at least to a 350-to-1 ratio, which meant that another FTE was going to be required for the larger schools, for them to have it. This position is broader than just counseling, because the other issues that counselors have expressed frustration with is when that one principal is gone, guess who's left in the building? And they're not even doing any counseling anymore. They now become the de facto administrator in the building also. So that is taking them away from doing their job also. And this position actually can do some of what the counselor does and those other things, which as Mr. Kale so eloquently said to me in talking through this issue, he said clearly, this will give me bigger bang for the buck. You can spend the money on another counselor, but my counselor would love me if I can get some of this stuff off their plate and they can do the things they're supposed to be doing, and this person also can do more than what they can do. So that's what was the difference. Instead of just getting another counselor, they're actually getting someone who also will be focusing on, as you know, we have the district-wide initiative with our SEL champions and a whole implementation of trauma efforts. You actually have more resources. And actually, you have now the ability that when we have to deploy when a principal is out. So like Washington principal, they're out sick. We literally have that counselor who is trying to do that duty, but also we have to have another administrator trying to cover that school also at the same time. You actually could redeploy. Now, this person may leave their building if that happens to go cover a building for that person to keep from pulling that counselor out of their duties.
Ms. McWhorter, you got a question?
Yes, I was just wondering, is this already been incorporated into our current budget?
Everything that you're seeing tonight has already been incorporated because, as you can see, we really took positions and repurposed them. So we actually took staffing and redirected the resources, listening to principals that some other staffing they had, this would give them a bigger return on investment.
Mr. Rolfe?
It says covered by reduction of full-time.
Dr. Barrow, you want to talk about some of the repurposing?
Sure. So what we did is we looked at the ratio of our support teams in our schools, our intervention teachers, our reading specialists, and our instructional coaches. And with the right sizing, we took we organized the schools by need based on their free and reduced lunch numbers on Title I, because we need to make sure that we are staying in compliance with Title I requirements. So we made sure that the ratios of the student supports and the free and reduced lunch numbers were in alignment. So our neediest schools get our most supports, and we backed it down from there. And through that realignment and repurposing of a few of those positions, one intervention position, a part-time reading specialist position, a part-time coach position, and then we also looked at our Title I funding, and we were able to pull some additional funds from our Title I funding in some of those buildings to cover an additional intervention position. So that's how we repurposed those roles into the Dean of SEALs. So they were already part of our existing budget. We just are redirecting those funds in a different way.
Ms. McWhorter?
So are people going to be furloughed? Are these little part-time positions here and there? Okay, that's all.
Everything that you're seeing tonight does not put anyone unemployed. It is redirecting resources to meet the needs of our students and also redirecting resources to follow where the student growth is. One of the things you hear later, which I think I compliment them, was looking holistically. When you see our middle level process, the two principals work collaboratively, look at the whole middle grade level and how to redeploy resources versus just looking at their buildings individually. So they actually came together and worked collaboratively to say, how do we solve this problem as best we can with the resources available? Because without it, what you hear later was we actually needed probably 2 or 3 more teachers if they didn't do that.
Mr. Rolfe?
I'm sorry, I'm completely lost now. So, for instance, the instructional coach, or take the reading teachers, what happened to them if they're not?
Well, we actually had one of our reading specialists requested to go part-time moving into next year, so that left a half of her role. And when we looked at the alignment of all the resources that we currently had in the district, that seemed to be a good place to be able to reallocate something. Our instructional coach, one of our instructional coaches, was serving Pine Forge, in addition to some other buildings. So she will just now be reallocating her time across the existing elementary buildings in conjunction with the other elementary coaches. So we were able to reduce a half of an elementary coach role there.
That accounts for one person, a half and a half.
We also had an intervention teacher who was a long-term sub position currently that was serving half at Pine Forge and half at Earl Elementary School. And we were able to look at our numbers and where we moved students through the right sizing. We were able to reallocate that position into one of the SEAL positions as well.
Do we have a job description for the SEAL?
Yes.
Dean of SEALs? And then are we going to have another job description for the counselors since they're not going to be doing what they were doing? Just a question.
No, counselors are doing the same thing. They can actually do their main job and not be pulled away from it. That's part of the problem. They're pulled away from their main job.
Thank you.
I guess the easiest way to put it, are we hiring more people? I'll get right down to the bottom here, and let's get around, not go around it anymore.
Well, I would put it a different way. The answer is you will hire people, but you're not adding more FTEs. You're not adding positions to the
Okay.
count.
I guess in the long run then, if we're eliminating some positions, I shouldn't say eliminating, repurposing some positions, we're hiring people in at the new salaries. What's the difference between the new positions that we're bringing in and the old positions that we're not going to have anymore? What's the dollar difference?
Well, as you see on the chart, we won't know that concretely until we know who the person is, because just like we do with a teacher leaving, it changes based on the teacher and their credentials. So that's the hard part, but we're not growing FTEs.
Okay, but we don't even anticipate what the increased costs are going to be, like a range?
I mean, we can typically use what the average salary cost is.
That's what I would expect. Yeah.
And our average cost typically is always around, even like for a teacher, is $100,000, which will probably go up now with the new contract with salary and benefits.
That's the full burden rate, 100,000? Because that includes all
Salary and benefits.
salary
The
and
average
benefits.
salary
Okay.
was sitting at around 78,000,
Okay.
and then you add in benefits. But again, that's the current agreement. Next year is going to be higher.
So with this change, we're not looking to add $500,000 to salary is my biggest
No.
question.
No, absolutely not. And I'll just check with our finance. I was using past average numbers. Am I way off?
You said 100, right?
Yes.
I think
Okay. All right. Okay. But you get the concept.
Ms. Diroff.
If we could just have the max of what it might go up for budget purposes, I'd rather deal with the higher number and look like it come in lower. Because if you're making a position like this, we want to hire the best. So they should probably have more credentials, so I would like to know the max.
Any other questions before you move over from the seal? I guess I would ask Mr. Chairman.
More, Mr. Brophy?
I thought I saw, and I could be wrong on this, that wasn't there a state program around SEL? Or am I thinking of the wrong SEL? Where there was funding for it? I'm not, that's the social emotional learning portion. I thought I saw something in the budget, but maybe I misread it. I mean, I might have seen something else.
I don't know about the state program, but a portion of safety is you're going to put in for grants that are around the mental health efforts. But as you know, here's the catch-22 this year. The $60 million that was put there in the past wasn't funded again this year, which is one of the criticisms of why you got the response you got from myself and certain superintendents that we're happy certain things are going up, but they're not holding a line on certain things. But this year we did not even get the $60 million, and we didn't even get the grant last year, which had a whole lot of problems with it, the way it was rolled out. But you may have seen, I'm just guessing, I do know that.
I think that's what I
Because
saw,
one of the
yes.
criticisms also of the process that we levied was there was a whole lot of emphasis and pizzazz on stuff when our point was the mental health is a bigger bang for the buck if we start addressing that. So there was a lot of chatter and conversation about that aspect of being more focused on the trauma, which is why they added the trauma piece to board training also for board members to have understanding, because there's typically a correlation between an issue with safety with those trauma and the mental health issue, that if we can get to those, we really wouldn't be dealing with a lot of this thing. And I know the couple of meetings, Ms. Dennon was there with me, doing this from memory. Am I still on from my memory?
So is that program, that money is gone, there's no chance we're going to get that? Nothing we can look for in the future?
Well, the
Just
$60
a
million
question.
right now is gone now. I do believe that there are other legislators who have issue with the fact that it was not funded, so that is a conversation piece. If it comes back, we'll reapply like we did this year, but there's no guarantee.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, I think what the point of taking that 60 million out was everybody's going to say we need that. So it might be used as a negotiating tool during the budget process, but until the budget is passed, and that's usually sometimes that's after we have to pass our budget, we won't know exactly what we get.
That's what it looked like to me when they were doing it. It looked like a negotiation piece, but I wasn't sure
Yeah.
how that affected us.
Sorry. Earlier I showed you a data from PSBA that looked at, number of administrators as a district to student ratio. We're actually looking at something that's a little more closer in comparison to administrator in each of the school to the student ratio data. So we actually are using the next slide that will show the data from Forecast Analytics that actually pulls the data directly from PDE. So Forecast 5 Analytics is a software program that actually helps K-12 education agencies and leaders leverage district demographics and peer data to develop, future focus budgeting process and how to manage limited resources that school districts have. It is not like the traditional Excel spreadsheet way of doing it. It is very progressive way of looking at data and analyzing it, and because they're able to get data from PDE, looking at that across the state, it really gives us a good comparison. And believe it or not, Forecast 5 is, very well known across the country in terms of helping districts and organizations look at data. So with that said, I can just. Okay. It's a lot of information, so bear with me, please. On top is the graph taken from Forecast 5 Analytics. What it is doing is actually it is looking at number of Berks County school districts. In particular, there's ours, which is the far left, and then next to it is Daniel Boone. Then we have Exeter, Governor Mifflin, Ole Valley, Wilson, and Wyomissing. And what it's doing is they're going back to 2016-17 up to current school year to look at the number of administrators, again, building administrators, to the number of students and looking at that ratio. So the highlighted one is Boyertown. This school year, we have 15 building administrators. That's including the assistant principals and principals. And our ratio is 457.8 compared to other Berks County school districts. So as you can see, we are one of the highest in terms of, administrator at the building level compared to the student ratio. And again, our larger elementary schools that, where the dean of.
When you're finished, Dr. Bennett has a comment.
Sure. Dean of SEALs are being proposed to. Those 3 elementary schools have over 550 students. Dean of SEAL will provide much needed support and assistance, which would greatly ultimately benefit our students.
I just want to, we put both these data points in there to get in front of the long-standing emotional comment that doesn't usually come with data that says that we have all these top-heavy administrators. And then when you ask people, what are you comparing that to? And it's just opinion that is always thrown out. And just like in most data points, we are typically below what others are. And even if you added 3, and by the way, the 3 we're talking about, are not even Act 93 employees. So we're not even asking for the establishment of positions that would be in the administrators' association. So we wanted this in here to put it in perspective when people walk out and say, oh, you got all these administrators, you're adding more, and then we're saying based on what? Just like we rolled out last year, if you remember, that we were below the average per pupil expenditure in Berks County. but yet we were in the top one or two in almost every category in performance. We were sitting almost $1,500 less per student. And by the way, at that time, if we had added the $1,500 per student, multiplied by our student enrollment, guess how much money that equated to? It was incidental, but I thought it was ironic that it was $9 million. That if we were funded at the average cost per student in Berks County, we would have had an additional $9 million, which, by the way, was the $9 million that was said that if we had stayed to the Act 1 index, we'd have had $9 million more dollars in our budget. So it's just kind of ironic to see that. But this is, again, being proactive and making sure the board has data-driven decisions to see how we are stacking up when there's concerns or questions about how we staff our buildings and our schools.
And then another position that we're proposing is supervisor of student services. As I've shared and we've shared earlier, a lot of these positions are being repurposed. So currently we have a school counseling coordinator. And as a school counseling coordinator, that person is, a member of a BAEA. They work 7.5 hours a day work schedule, and any work that is done outside the established teacher work schedule is being compensated at professional hourly rate as per collective bargaining agreement. Or, depending on the circumstances, compensatory time off could be made, could be arranged if, one is being fiscally responsible. So again, we do have a current person in the coordinator position. And National Association of Elementary School Principals have, made, put out in their website that school counselors, play such a critical role, as we've already discussed. But yet, we as a school district don't have anyone that serves as his, supervisor, other than that it's a coordinator. And coordinators can organize a meeting, schedule a meeting, and, provide guidance and support, but is not able to direct or supervise any counselors. That's just how, because they're the same association members. So with that said, if you look at the position and the pay, the current school year pay rate, we already have somebody serving in the coordinator position. It's with, our pay scale for the BAEA agreement goes up to master's 30. A master's plus 30 plus 8. That's step 8. That's what we have. And that's the salary leading up to, and there is a stipend that comes with that. And they are currently working, counselors work 210 days, including the coordinators. Okay, so based on next year's projected salary, based on the pay scale per collective bargaining agreement, that is going to go up to $97,777, working for 210 days. As supervisor of student services, this position would be working 216 days. Again, 190 student day, professional days, coupled with 26 days worked out with the administration. And the proposed position salary would be $97,708. So it's just $3 additional. Yet we are able to, get a lot more out of this position. The person is committed and has done a really nice job supporting the counseling services. And again, it is to, make sure that we're being efficient and effective in operating school counseling programs as a district, and making sure that we're providing a safe teaching and learning environment to all of our students and staff. That's really important as well. And the job description was attached to this Friday's. I didn't know.
Ms. Diro.
Dan is right. Will this person be able to direct or supervise?
Yeah, because the job description requires.
Okay, because I thought you said the person doing it was good and they're going to keep doing it, so.
No, so
And
that's
they
a
weren't.
coordinator position. This is a supervisor position. So if you're a supervisor, because of the job description, we have a requirement that that person has a supervisor certificate from PDE. That person can directly supervise now. So it.
So that's not a BEA
This, so the
position that
supervisor-
we're making.
It's not. It's a
And
supervisor.
and they're okay with this. Don't we have to get permission or something?
It's a different position.
Mr. Brophy.
So this is only one person then, not three like the other ones?
No.
So this person will travel around between different schools, or how's that going to work?
Yes, supervisor. Middle of early part of the school year, shifted the position, the location to Middle School West, but was in the past at the high school. So that person will be the one traveling and coordinating and supervising the counselors at different schools.
Okay, won't you just be three schools, then it'll be all the schools? I think what I understand from the deans is they're responsible basically for the three main schools. This supervisor will be responsible for all of the
10.
9 remaining schools.
All 10,
All 10.
9,
Yeah,
yeah, next school year, yes.
It's important to know that you can't be in the same bargaining unit and give
Supervisor.
directive and supervisor of those personnel. So that's the other issue. This person has been met with. They have embraced the idea. They are one of the biggest champions of our SEL movement. They do a lot of things currently beyond, but as you know, we end up having to make compensation efforts to offset when they are called in for emergencies, when we get crisis to go call, when we get safe to say calls in the evening and stuff like that. We end up having to compensate, either look at trading off days with them and or some type of leave or some other form of compensation. Obviously, as a salaried exempt category, we lose all of that. And actually, we're coming out on the plus side when you look at the number of days that they're working with the minimal transition. All of these transitions were done to try to not hurt any employee in their normal progress moving forward. The same as we treated teachers in this transition with right sizing, trying to repurpose the staffing, we try to make sure we did not harm anybody compensation-wise also in this process, but also focus on here's our budgetary limitations. It really was about repurposing, and as I said, for casting this conversation, in some cases, small incremental increase because you couldn't do a dollar for dollar trade-off in certain things.
Mr. Foos?
So for clarification, is the current coordinator the person that will be serving in the supervisor role, and they were consulted about this change and were agreeable and thought this was a good move? Okay, thank you.
Just one more quick.
Of course, yes, Mr. Brophy.
They actually go through a lot of it already, so they will continue and probably get additional. They will actually be able to attend additional training by virtue of their category and their role now as a supervisor.
Yeah, the only reason I ask that is if somebody moves into this position, a year from now they decide I don't want it anymore, do we have to retrain somebody into it? That's, I'm just looking at the upheaval of training new people and also the cost.
If I may, by the virtue of this person already having the management of PDE supervisory cert / principal cert from PDE, that person has already gone through extensive educational and training as well.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, we have Ms. McWhirter.
Are we required to advertise positions? Like, since this is going to be a new position, are we required to advertise in any way? Oh,
So there's typically through a process, there are oftentimes, job postings are done, but then superintendent may have the authority, may decide to, designate somebody or assign somebody. Next position we're proposing is school safety coordinator / school police officer. We currently have a school police officer who is a member of classified job category. And as a classified, that person, typically works 8 hours a day, and any work that's done beyond those, it's overtime. And of course, if they work more than 40 hours in a week, so that's overtime is time and a half, which has financial implication depending on the need of the school police officer to be present, whether it's after school or any weekend events. In addition to that, currently we do have district security personnel, and some are through third-party vendors, yet we lack systemic supervision responsibility, someone who oversees that with in-depth knowledge of security, which is missing. And so from the district safety lens, we are proposing this position. And if you look at the chart that's on the screen, currently that person is an hourly employee working 8 hours a day and works 183, which is student days. And just based on the overtime, and that's a very small amount of overtime compared to what it could be, and we were trying to be fiscally responsible in many ways. And the way the classified employees, their pay structure is set is that they have satisfactory evaluation, they get base Equine Index increase. So with that in mind, projection for next year's salary would be, again, working 8 hours a day, 183 days would be 57,000 and some change. But if that person were to work 216 days, as what we're proposing this position to be, it would be almost 64,000. That's not counting any overtime and comp time that person has earned. And so under this plan, the proposed salary would be 65,000 for 216 days. And we added a little more than like the other one that is exactly like 63,790 or $800, because this person actually has additional work that the person does outside after hours. And so by taking on this position, that the police officer would not be able to fulfill that obligation. So we wanted to offset that a little bit as well. But that so we are being fiscally prudent, as you can see, and I will say in many school districts across the state have this position as their Act 93. And we're not asking for that. It is, again, mid-level management. And I think, there have been more mandates issued from the state with respect to school safety. And I think, Mrs. Torsha has done a great job. She is often referred to as a safety queen, but it's a lot. She has other responsibilities as well. So I think this is an important position.
Mr. Brophy, you had a question?
Yeah, I understand Wolf has cut the safety security budget, but are there any possible grants we might be looking at for this position through the course of the year?
And I think Mrs. I'm sorry, I'm talking on and on. People can't hear. I apologize. So Mrs. Torsha has been, vigilantly looking at those possible grants, and she has applied for many. And because there's so many school districts that are competing, it's been pretty competitive. But she's always on the, looking for them as well.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Rupp, did you have a question? And then Jill?
I must have heard wrong. Did you say we're giving them more money because they won't be able to do their part-time job?
The person already currently has an outside work, yes. So it's just a minor and would not be qualifying for any overtime. So what
I think what she's saying, you need to be clear, it's work that they do for the district, not outside the
Yeah.
district. She's thinking I believe that you're saying that we're compensating them for
No,
outside work.
the person's
We're
working for the
restricting them
district.
from being able to do some of the extra duties that they would normally do for the district.
Yeah, I apologize for the error on that one. The person's already doing additional work for the district. So that is additional compensation.
I thought you said outside of the district, were earning extra money.
No,
Now they couldn't do it.
it's the person's working for the district as a security capacity for games and so forth.
Okay, how many police officers do we have? Or people that
You and security personnel?
well, yeah, if we're gonna hire a coordinator, for how many people is this?
So we have, if my memory serves me correct, and I'll double check on it, but I think we have a couple at the high school. And then we also have a third party agency that provides security personnel at the high school and our middle schools.
So, a couple at the high school, what, 1, 2?
I'll double check on it, but I think it's 2 or 3.
So we're gonna hire a coordinator for 4 people?
So it's not. So it is. It's a systemic security supervision that we need. Our current school police officer are being called to support schools, across the district.
Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Denon?
So this person is going to be a police officer?
It's actually currently is a school police officer. Currently is school police officer. So the official title, by making into this mid-level management group, is school safety coordinator.
Okay, so it's going to be more than just supervising the other people. They're going to be doing the job that they're doing now.
Oh, absolutely.
They're just going to be asked to do some supervisory.
It's in
work.
addition to what they're
In
currently
addition-
doing.
So in addition to what they're currently doing, they're going to be asked to be doing supervisory work. I guess my only question is, why is it 216 days? Because why would we need security if we don't have kids at the school? Just a question. I'm not sure.
So I think one of the things we do have ESY program, but I think when we looked at it, it's not ESY. To my recollection, is not the entire summer. It's typically, so it's like I think 6 to 8 weeks. So 6 weeks. Thank you. We have a director of special ed out there. So it's not 12 months. So we are trying to maximize the service, but yet try to be fiscally prudent as well. And if I may, so when it's a mid-management, they're not bound by 8-hour schedule, after work, on weekends when we need help.
So just to clarify, we're not hiring someone to supervise 4 or 5 security people. It's just we're keeping this position and we're just expanding their scope of work.
Yes.
Okay.
Additional duties and responsibilities.
What you're losing is no longer accruing overtime at time and a half. Honestly, again, another example of the previous employee this person was met with, and they actually, in the end, are having certain restrictions put on with extended opportunities. But for example, when we deploy them now for certain events like meetings, when there's going to be a concern for crowd and attendance, we have to pay them overtime. We lose that now as part of it. But also the supervisory aspect that you come in, and I've asked for them what the set of text, what's the total number. But they also are going to be overseeing the third-party management contract for us that we have, because they're boots on the ground out in the field. And we do have some expectations that we need to upgrade that area. I do not believe, how should I say, we've had conversations about our return on investment that needs more oversight in what we're paying for the third party.
Okay. Next one is human resources manager. So when we looked at this person's role, we currently have a human resources analyst who has earned a combined of overtime that's again earned at 1.5 times hourly rate and compensatory time off previously. And it was recently learned that so sorry. Let me try again. We currently have a human resources analyst who has earned a combination of overtime at 1.5 times, coupled with compensatory time given off. I think it's my notebook knocking it off, so I apologize. Previous administration actually had frowned upon and prohibited overtime, but I have to say, I've worked in a number of school districts, and we have some incredibly dedicated employees, and because they were really felt strongly obligated to fulfill their duties and responsibilities, they actually did work outside of work on their own just to fulfill their responsibilities and make sure that the department and the district needs were being met. So it wasn't until I recently we learned that such type of work, even though the person chose to work voluntarily, did those work outside the set schedule, that's in violation of Fair Labor Standards Act if the management is aware, and that really puts the district in liability. So, but that coupled with the fact that the duties that this person actually is fulfilling in many districts is actually done under someone who has the role of an assistant director of HR. So when we looked at the role, the HR department is servicing 10 schools, many departments, and approximately 800 employees, not counting 200 plus, workers that are through third party as well, and not including the substitutes that we have. And so, we're not able to. We could definitely do a better job of, being efficient and effective in delivering HR needs as a district. So, we're proposing HR manager position. And if you look at the pay rate, currently that person, that position works 260 days, 8 hours a day. And, the pay rate that comes out to be is on the screen. And looking at just the overtime, again, that's not counting the comp and additional voluntary work hours that the person has done. It's almost 4,000. And so, next year with the, again, 2.3 base Equine index, it's, for 44,000 and a little over 500. But what we're proposing, again, is working 260 days, unlike the other position, and have it at 58 just based on the work and the responsibility. If that is, we find that it to be appropriate. So that is a recommendation. And again, many of these positions are repurposing and or reallocating the funds.
Mr. Ruff?
How many people do we no longer have under our roof now that we have Crest? How many people do we lose, and we're looking to hire somebody to do more time?
So, Mrs. Deroff, to answer your question, we have, based on my recollection, it's a little over 200 employees that have partnered, that have transitioned over to Crest. However, one of the things that I think it's important is that my department is still heavily involved in making sure that we communicate with them. We do quite a bit on a regular basis work with Crest. Even though they are not our employee, we work collaboratively with them when it comes to making sure that our building needs are being met.
How did that work out for us? We have people every day now filling those positions. We have no trouble getting subs.
In terms of a sub for paraprofessional subs, no, that is still an ongoing concern. Absolutely. And the next one is communications and marketing specialist. Board members who were with us last about a year and a half ago may recall that the administration at the time, with the support of the board then, sought to have a more focused and direct communications and marketing services to the district. Prior to that time, we did have an independent contractor that provided the services. And based on the feedback, the administration felt that we needed someone who could actually devote more time and better service the district. And at that time, the administration articulated the desire to, ultimately down the road, have that position become an in-house position. And to be fiscally prudent, the administration said we were going to review its return on investment. And some of you may recall that we currently have communications and marketing specialist service through Foundation for Boyertown Education, and it's part-time basis, 30 hours a week, but 26 would be dedicated to Boyertown and 4 hours dedicated to the foundation. So it's, the expectation was 26 hours a week dedicated to Boyertown. But what we have found is that this position has served, this person in the role has served well beyond 30 hours per week service to the district. In fact, many weeks it had been 40 plus hours. So it's, the person has done significant amount of work to the district. And even if you just come through the Ed Center alone, you can see that, a lot of things have been beautified, just highlighting our students' work as well. More importantly, we have our webpage. District webpage has undergone a huge transformation. Our communication to the stakeholders and parents have improved significantly, and that's all thanks to the current communications and marketing specialist. So with that, and again, it will help, make our communication operation, information sharing more effective. And with respect to budget, it's, as you can see on the screen, currently, the position is being paid $18 an hour for 216 days. If we were to, use, for comparison, using base Ec1 index increase, that would be $18.40 an hour for next school year. What we're recommending is that for this position, again, keep it at 216-day position, but it be $19 an hour, and it's a 40-hour-a-week position.
Mr. Ruff?
Not through the foundation,
Yes.
but
Yes.
why is that?
I can answer that.
Sure.
One, if you remember from the get-go, the foundation agreed to be a transition process anyway, and the 26 hours is not working with the volume of work that's being done for the work that we're asking of the person. And it actually, in my mind, compared to what we have, having that dedicated person and resource to the district is actually, from feedback from principals and one-on-one conversations with the change has been helpful. The changes that you see in our website, the changes you see, we have all of our schools now, for example, have Facebook pages that are under district's control now that weren't. We had zero control of that situation. We have a much more interactive social media presence. They're getting ready to launch a 10-cycle recruitment process for our charter school students that was asked. So we have a whole laundry list of things that have gone forward that we actually own and are doing now in-house. For comparison, just to give you an example, our neighboring district in Wilson, a similar position is being paid in the mid-70s and above. And I actually have other staff people that are also in that department. But it was always a conversation going all the way back to the meeting in the meeting room at, I believe, Earl, that this was a transition process that we were going to go through and slowly phase in the position. At this point, the volume of the workload, we believe it's prudent to go ahead and move forward again, a cost effective. We're really getting a deal when you look at the market value for the position and what's happening.
Continue with Mr. Rolfe and then Mr. Brooks.
Are we going to include grant writing like we had before with the person that we had as one of the responsibilities, or are we not doing that either?
We're not putting it in the job description, but they participate in grant writing along collaboratively, whether it be with other offices, they still participate. But honestly, I would not dare do that because what has happened in the past, people believe that that should be the big part of the job when it's really not the big part of the job. If they're not out at our schools serving our principals in our schools and doing the communication that it should be doing and spending time doing that, we're not going to get a return on investment anyway. But where there's need and resource for the communications department to collect data, they have collaborated with Dr. Barrow for our title work. They have collaborated with the foundation in their grant writing, which they still do, and they have collaborated with Ms. Tertier in her security grant writing also, and they will continue to do that.
Okay, so now this position does qualify for full medical benefits? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Mr. Foos?
You listed some of the things that they've worked on in the past. Is there any capacity in this expanded role to also work on some of the initiative with dealing with promoting our cyber charter, niche, school digger, and things of that nature?
That's what I was referring to. They actually are now working with OTL for our 10. Is she here? Oh. Please, come on up to the mic. And the new campaign that you all are working on now for that, and then the work with niche that is going forward.
Evening. As far as niche is concerned, the profile that has been expanded on niche is continuing to be developed. We have gone through our first campaign with them in terms of advertising our district via social media. We are making some changes and we'll continue to work together to develop that relationship and the profile and gather statistics on who's visiting the site. As far as the cyber charter, bringing our students back to Boyertown, actually today all 11 of the district's web pages were updated. We are going to do a first of its kind online series to train our learning community about the impact of outside cyber and charter schools on our district and how we plan on trying to bring kiddos home, and advertising our own Berks County online learning opportunity, which is at a much greater a greater cost savings as opposed to outside charters. So that series is actually kicking off with the help of the curriculum coordinator for secondary schools. We're going to do video sessions, a few minutes in length, that will then be shared via social media and via our websites to inform the public on things such as what's the difference between a cyber and a charter school. We actually met with our business advisory team last week, I believe, and we were shocked to learn what the community at large doesn't know about cyber and charter, and even the difference between online learning and brick and mortar buildings. We're going to educate folks on the fact that it isn't free as it's advertised, that there actually is a cost to the district and what those costs are, and let them know about performance of those schools versus performance of the district. We're going to talk to them about our own online offering and what the benefits are from participating in our program, because there are really valid points out there as to why folks choose cyber or charter learning for kiddos with anxiety, performing arts kiddos, those types of things. So informing the public on all of that, and then the plan is to move into personal contact via phone and personal visits. We also plan on interacting with our current online Berks Learning students to have them participate in the videos as well. So that's a huge project that actually kicked off officially today and will continue in the coming months. So, does that answer your question? Okay.
Do we look at any other rating systems besides niche, or is that the only one we're dealing with? There's several out there.
Right now, we're dealing with niche specifically. We have not necessarily made any decisions about any others. In terms of ratings, too, as far as the district is concerned, we're really starting to promote the Future Ready Index that allows folks to also compare our performance against these cyber schools in all of the same categories with really great graphic representation of the direction our district is moving versus the cyber schools and things of that nature. So, okay.
Sorry. Before we move on to the next slide, I did want to take a moment to just kind of reiterate the fact that the supportive supervisory group is not an Act 93 group, which is an upper management one. This is mid-level management, and that by the nature of the work that's expected and the education, the training, experience and knowledge, the problem-solving skills that these folks will need to do, the level of accountability and the supervisory duties and responsibilities for these proposed positions, that they exceed the classified position category by the nature of that alone. So rather, they are mid-level management and belong in a unit of supportive supervisory group. It's important to also note that we're talking about many of them are being the positions are repurposing them because we already have current employees that are doing many of those roles and continue to provide services and assume additional responsibilities without too much of an additional compensation to the district, such as overtime or comp time off when performing beyond their regular workday hours. Even though some current employees might voluntarily do that, it is still in violation of Fair Labor Standards Act. Once we become, and then we're liable for that. So the students in the district and their families, staff, and the community members will benefit from the district operating more efficiently, effectively, while continue to be fiscally prudent. And I think these positions will help us move go further in that direction. Next is, staffing changes update due to program modifications and or some of the changes. So, as you know, the board has voted to close Pine Forge, and with that, we've been working diligently on reassigning.
Mr. Chairman, before you go forward, there had to be a question of moving those positions forward.
Thank you. I apologize.
Yeah. Some clarification about any more questions with those positions or the ability to move them forward, because to comply with policy, lost it here. In the Policy 301 it governs the creation of new positions, and it basically, if you have not seen it, says positions and administrative and professional classified employees shall be established by the board in order to provide effective leadership and management of the district, and it's based on a recommendation of the superintendent. There are 5 criteria that the board policy consideration is supposed to consider, which is effective management of district programs, the number of students enrolled, special needs of students, operational needs of the district, and financial resources of the school community. And then it says superintendent shall be responsible for recommending a new and additional administrative, professional, and classified positions. These positions, both the new and the repurposed, we need the board's permission to move them forward from this committee for consideration for a vote. And again, before we move on to the next category, I think you need to address that, else it'll get lost in the process.
Okay, with that, is there any further comments?
And Mr. Chairman, they ask the question as a group, or someone can have a concern that they want to look at them individually if they have a concern about a position.
Say if you just wanted to go.
Take a motion to
We don't really need a motion, we just,
to the next reading?
yeah, we just need to, you can just ask if anybody's opposed, I guess.
Anybody opposed to us moving this forward to the voting meeting? Thumbs up.
Thank you. There have been staffing changes, update due to program modifications, and also with Pine Forge closure. So when the board had voted...
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, guys. Just so that we had to get through those, if I could ask Dr. Kim to switch the order for the middle school principals, because it's getting late.
Absolutely.
If we can start in that area and then go to the Pine Forge, just out of respect for them.
Absolutely.
To be able to. And then come back to the Pine Forge update.
Absolutely. So with the second bullet is middle school instructional model. So Dr. Bedden had mentioned that, we had our middle school principals take a look at their staffing and to, think about how we can better meet the needs of the students of both schools. So with that said, at both middle schools, they worked really hard to make sure that there's equity in class sizes. I don't know if you want them to come up and speak at all. Okay, so Mr. Rupert and Mrs. Landis.
While they're coming, each of you all received the more detailed in your weekly report. Mr. Rupert is here to, again, for the public, give a 30,000-foot view of what's happening with Ms. Landis, and then to answer any questions you may have specific to that initiative. So, Mr. Rupert and Ms. Landis.
What we were looking to do was, the main charge was to try and balance the class sizes as best we could. Selfishly, what Steph and I wanted to try to do, though, was maintain as much of the middle school model that we really like as possible when we were doing that. And I think when we kind of put our heads together, we really were able to come up with, some ways, the best plan we could in terms of getting that class size balance that we wanted in the major subject areas, and at the same time, really being able to maintain some of the key features of the middle school in terms of teaming students. Most of the kids, we feel, we're pretty confident, because I had to do a little bit of this last year, as it was because of the size of the current 8th grade class. What we did was we wound up trying to team as very many as the kids as we did. This year, just as an example, I was able to keep about 2/3 of the kids with a team. And when we talk about a team, what we're talking about is the same set of students having the same science, math, social studies, and ELA teacher. That's really what we were trying to accomplish. And so really by us taking a look at the class size at each building that was coming, and then the existing staff that we had, we were able to make a few adjustments so that we have pretty equitable class sizes in the mid-20s now at both buildings.
It's important to give history context for the public and for new board members. While I was in your weekly report, one of the charges actually at a session at Colbrookdale was a discussion that we had switched from a traditional middle school model to a teaming model. And the fact that we may have to look at doing it differently because of the staffing requirements, that gets to Mr. Rupert and Ms. Landis' effort. And again, we said at that meeting that the teaming model we believe is a better instructional model, but it was a challenge fiscally to sustain it. So they attacked this from the standpoint of one, my directive to them based on that meeting to provide me with what it would look like staffing wise or traditional. They showed some initiative and tried to say, how do we, as I guess I took Mr. Brophy's words yesterday, how do we do it differently without dismantling the program? Totally. So in going back to the drawing board, this is what they came up with, and I call it a hybrid, and they looked at their resources between both buildings as opposed to individually with their buildings. What you received in your weekly report showed the balancing out of class sizes throughout both middle schools. Had they not done this, we were looking at 2 or 3 FTEs needed to address his continued enrollment growth. The trade-off is 2 main things. We will have to have, I think, 4 staff members move from west to east. Those staff members will have individual meetings to discuss the transition with them. And the bigger other piece is this model now allows our librarians to go back to be librarians. They may have maybe 1 period, but that was the issue in the right sizing discussion that was had when I was brought on board as superintendent to try to see if we can get that back in place. But again, more equitable class size, and this may buy us even another couple years as we look at and see whether growth is really coming or not in the process. The high class, I think, was looked like 26, I think, size, and then the low end looks like 22, roughly. So the range of 22 to 26. That could be better for ease of calculation and expediency as we were running out of time. That include a whole collective of all students, and some of those students will not be there when they would be in other areas based on their specialized programs that could drop some of these numbers down. But this is more like right now projected worst case scenario on class sizes that are equitable across both schools, and again, change process. So that's the discomfort. 4 staff members will go through change, and I think several, 2 or 3 maybe, will end up with 3 preps instead of typical 2 or less in this process. We will have to say to people, and it somehow was lost in the conversation, that we've always said this right sizing was from the get-go, even with Bill Montgomery, that says as long as you have potential growth, you're never done until the growth tapers off. So you can't ever say we fixed the problem. There are people, and I think when Dr. Barrow was going through this before she brought her kids back, districts that are actually having to change boundaries almost on an annual basis because of their fast growth districts, and others are every 2 or 3 years. So until you get growth stagnant and stable, there's always a potential of continued change in this process. And this becomes, again, in lieu of having to find resources to buy more staff, an option that also still tries to equalize enrollment between the 2 buildings. Class size, excuse me, not enrollment.
When we looked at this year, currently East has 175 more students than West has, and their building size is slightly larger. The capacity of East is larger than West as well. But when we looked at our current staffing models, I believe East has 1 more additional special education teacher than West has. But other than that, we were working with the exact same number of core staff in our core subject areas. So in order to make those class sizes more equal, that's where we were working with those numbers, to have some go over to East. And we even have some coming to West as we look at certifications and what our needs are with that.
Mr. Chairman, while they're up there, because it impacts their buildings, so they could leave too in case you have questions. You have the gift and the specialized programs also that have a shift. If we can get them on board, then go to the Pine Forge also. Dulcie, if you...
Yeah, Mrs. Rothamel.
Oh, the other person hiding back there.
And
Caitlin, I'm sorry,
Ms.
didn't see you
Bartman.
back there. Couldn't see you. So again, you received your in your weekly report. We have the ES, doing this from memory, so correct me, program. Because of the right sizing within enrollment growth of Boyertown, so far we're doing this from memory.
Doing great.
The ES program will be switched and flipped over to Gilbertsville because now they're going down in size and they have space to absorb that program. Same model we've used where there's space with our district-wide specialized programs and where we place our specialized programs. Then you have the LLS and autistic program. Autistic is in Washington currently and being moved to Cobrookdale.
Yep.
Cobrookdale, which will allow them to also maintain alignment with their feeder pattern system that they had not been following. So they were actually going to west when. Am I right so far?
Washington.
Washington is feeding into, but Washington now will be
east.
going all to east in this new feeder pattern. But they will now, by coming over to Cobrookdale, will stay and feed with their normal to their middle school with the rest of their student population. And the LLS is currently at Cobrookdale, which will be going to Washington, where they will also be in alignment with their feeder pattern with their middle school program. And you did have parent meetings, conversations already?
We sent out parent letters to our autistic support parents and our life skills support parents, and the emotional support parents will be notified. We just made that recommendation.
Another area up on their specialized programs, Gifted is a specialized program also. As you saw in your report, that we had an inequity as well as inequality in the current design model that was being offered. You had a segment of students that were getting 82 minutes worth of services, and a segment that was only getting 42. Predominantly elementary and 8th grade were 42, 6th and 7th were 82. We also had a person retiring or leaving at the end of the year. So we were losing one full FTE. We put back in a 0.6 with the direction to do a model redesign of the program to create more equity as well as equality in the program. I know that they have been working. I have not seen the final plan. I don't know if you have any comments at this point, but last time I got feedback was you all were working feverishly to still maintain the rigor and the quality of the services, but also create equity of services between the students.
That is accurate. I know.
No.
You summed it up nicely.
I know.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions for the two directors of special ed? No? Thank you.
Thank you.
And I thank you for the flexibility. The Pine Forge is an update, but these were new things that they may have to leave, and I wanted to make sure they were available for the board if they had any questions. You can get the Pine Forge staffing update.
Dr. Bednar, are you, will the principal?
They can, unless they want to hear the update on
Okay.
the Pine Forge.
So-
Yes. You're,
I don't know. I like you.
so you can stay or you can leave.
Yes.
Go.
I'm giving you the look, yes.
'Cause I know
Have
it's
a good
getting
night.
late.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you. So with the closure of Pine Forge, the administration spent quite a bit of time looking at the teachers that are currently at Pine Forge, along with other employees that are at Pine Forge, and looking at their reassignments for next school year. With respect to so we have, for Boyertown, Pine Forge staff that are either professionals and or classified. So honestly, classified staff reassignment is much easier because we don't have to look at their specific certifications as we do with our professionals, meaning the teachers. So, I went and met with all the classified staff and communicated with them as to what their next year's assignment will be, so they are aware. At times, I met with supervisor food services for the cafeteria staff workers, and then also with Mr. Charles Drescher for the maintenance staff. I met with them, and also I had a conversation with the cafeteria recess aides, as well as the principal secretary. So they're aware. And with respect to the teachers, that was a little bit, I will say, it was very tricky in terms of, looking at their certifications. And we also had to look at whether they're in a tenure status or not. And then if they were tenured, what is their seniority? So there are multiple factors we had to look at. That coupled with, where are the vacancies for next school year? So that was an important piece. It was written in the board update. Pennsylvania School Code has very specific language as to what constitutes somebody who's tenured and who's not. And without going into a whole lot of detail, because the board has received them, but if we have teachers who are non-tenured, they actually are classified according to school code as temporary professional employees. So if we have simply oftentimes referred to as TPEs, according to school code, TPEs are not entitled to recalls if there's a furlough process. So at times when school districts are in a situation where they're closing schools, oftentimes it's much easier in a sense to just not renew TPE's contract. And, if there's a vacancy, they would have to reapply. But recognizing that that's, I think Dr. Bedden had made it clear and upfront earlier when we looked at, the Pine Forge closure process, that our intent was not to furlough folks. So, it was important for us to take a look at very closely as to how we can best utilize everyone. So rather than to not renew TP's contract, we have been in close communication with the association and working on an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, so that should any, TPEs had to be furloughed, that they would have the recall rights. That would, if there's a vacancy, we don't have to have them apply. They can simply, based on the certification, if they match, we would allow them to come back. But fortunately, we did not have to do that because all the Pine Forge teachers have been reassigned. So we'll be having that meeting. Mr. Stout from the Office of Teaching and Learning and I will be over at Pine Forge this Friday. We will have an individual meetings with the teachers and let them know their assignment at this moment in time for next school year. We will have that conversation. So that's been done. So again, all Pine Forge teachers have been reassigned. I think that will be a relief to a lot of folks because I know they're in lots of angst as well. And that's not to downplay the fact that school closure is it's a very sensitive topic, and it's a huge change, as Dr. Bedden had alluded to. Change process is hard. Then we also have CRESS employees that are working at Pine Forge. So Mr. Joe Vaillancourt, the HR director from CRESS, and I met with the CRESS employees who are servicing our Pine Forge students. And we met with them to say we don't have the specific reassignment information, but that our goal is to have every one of those folks re-employed with the district next school year. I think there was some questions about, I think Mr. Vaillancourt did say at this point in time, we don't have any vacant positions at the elementary level for next school year. However, we did say that based on the fact that many of the CRESS employees are servicing our students with special needs, we anticipate the need to still exist. One-on-one parents will be going with the students to their new schools. And, the special ed needs will continue to present itself. So we will, we're working on finalizing that information. Also, Title I, paraeducators, we're still going to have a need for them. So, we don't anticipate any of those positions not to be needed. So that's, yeah.
When will all the Crest employees actually know? When will that, it's understanding this is very, very sensitive issue.
Mm-hmm.
So them finding out as soon as possible is paramount.
Absolutely. So when Mr. Vaillancourt and I were there, we were looking at, what we had told the Pine Forge professionals were that early March was our target date. And when, again, Mr. Vaillancourt and I were there, we were aiming for, early March as well. Now, we do need to work closely with the directors of special ed to make sure that, their information is correct and matching that up. But that is the date that we're aiming for. If it could be done sooner, absolutely.
Okay, if that moves back, you're going to get that out to everybody right away, that the date will be made or not made, and a new date if there is one?
Absolutely.
So that they're not kept in suspense?
Absolutely. If there is, for some reason, we need to delay because we need to look at other data, we will communicate that as well.
I appreciate hearing where there was a one-on-one that they'll be moving with the student. Have the students and parents been notified that that'll be the case as well?
We have not had any formal conversations with the parents, but that's something that we will be working with the special ed directors.
That was my question.
I have a question. Have any other jobs within the district, say part-time, been affected because of the absorption of the Pine Forge teachers?
No.
Good.
I mean, I will say kindergarten is always iffy, so, that's hard to say. But we could have additional enrollment with kindergarten, so we could need additional staff, but that's just unknown. This page pretty much summarizes, what we have discussed from the last page. Again, the key outcomes of staffing changes at the elementary class sizes, it's more equitable. With the right sizing, the district average is, 22 and a half. And, the class size ranges from 17 to 25. So that's, that's looking really nice compared to where it was before, because I think it was uneven before. And middle school class sizes, as Dr. Baden had alluded to earlier, that ranges from 21 to 26. And middle school, their principals have shared that we haven't totally moved away from team model. It's a hybrid. It's a bit of team that still exists in both of those middle schools. And we were able to balance class sizes at both the middle level and at the elementary level. And we have, dedicated resources, assuming through our proposed positions that support the social emotional learning initiatives as a district. And, returning the middle school librarians back to the library in the worst case scenario might be teaching one class, but, we're optimistic that won't even be needed. Specialized programs moving to schools that align better with the school feeders patterns, equity and equality of resources for the gifted program, and effective and efficient use of district space for specialized programs, and aligning our staff to better serve the students' needs. And that's not without some of the challenges. We recognize while there are some positive outcomes due to staffing changes, but the reality is, while when teachers are employed by the school district, they work for the school district, it's natural for them to bond with their, one particular school. And so it becomes their second home for many of them. So anytime there's a change like that and they have to go to a different school, it's a huge loss for them. So we want to be able to recognize that, so we don't take transfers lightly. But I think under the circumstances that we're facing, try to be fiscally responsible, but yet also trying to, meet the needs of the students and the district. Some changes are necessary. And also, speaking of change management process, oftentimes it mirrors that of grief, the mourning process. So we are just very cognizant of that, and we want to be mindful. And we do appreciate, all of our staff, classified through professional and to our administrators for working so diligently to, make the staffing changes possible. Again, with the goal in mind of, meeting the students' needs.
I just want to remind everyone that, so I met with the Student Registration Assignment Office today, and again, these projections are projections based on the data they have now. More concrete numbers typically are scrubbed in April when they get more concrete enrollment projections that are coming in, and we'll provide you another update then to see if these are holding true. As always, the wild card is kindergarten. While we, want more and more students, the good news is when more students come, we got more students. The challenge is when we get more students, it requires more resources. And unfortunately, resources monetarily from the state still are not keeping up with, as you saw, universal kindergarten was proposed for everyone, but it had no funding to come with it. So that was kind of like, really? What are we supposed to do? Print money to do that? And again, unfortunately, as you know, budgetary-wise, the good news is we did better, special ed, with some of our cost factors that dropped us below the threshold, but the negative is we don't get any exceptions, potentially. So it's good for the taxpayer, definitely. Makes it easier. It's a decision for the board to deal with. The flip side is we have less additional resources coming, but obviously if we continue to trend, hopefully become more efficient and effective with our cost factors that we can control, which, that is one of the things that we have is a controllable thing that we did a better job in. The uncontrollable on special ed is when a student has a need and they show up in your district, we can't control that. And that can be a cost driver that is unpredictable for the school district. But we will continue to follow as enrollment shifts, and we get typically periodically monthly updates or every other month that she does, but she said today that the more bigger number for me to pay attention to is when they start running data in April also with regards to enrollment projections.
So I just have one question. If our enrollment goes up, and I know it's really hard to predict with kindergarten and all that, but if we see a school that has a class, let's say third grade, and they're gonna exceed our recommended guidelines, do we then look at adding more staff, or is it just a guideline and we're not and we just don't? It's just a guideline. I'm just curious what we're.
Well, first of all, our class size are guides that we put in place to try to stay within, and then we meet as a team and try to discuss our options that are available for us and our resources. So I would not sit here and tell you it's a blanket. We just go out and find another teacher, because honestly, there's a point in time, I'm just being really real, that you get into the school year and hiring, there's not a whole lot of availability. So school districts in my 17 years as superintendent, you do everything from talking to the teacher, because there are teachers who've had 30 in a class and you would never have known it. By the makeup of the class and the rituals and routines the teachers have, to some who've had 20-something, and it was more of a challenge depending on the makeup of the class. So you look at that type of thing. You look at available resources. Sometimes schools have added an aide. Because you also ask, where can we send them? I've been in a district where we also offered a voluntary parent who wanted to switch. If there was another space somewhere else, if they wanted to voluntarily do it. So we look at all our toolbox and say what's available. So our first priority is to try to stay within those ranges. Sometimes, as we already do now, before the right size, it may end up with one or two more than what we anticipate, and we just stay the course. If it gets really large, then they come down and have a real conversation. This is really getting big. And then we have gone out and tried to hire an LTS, for example, to come in. The other challenge is, where is it? If you have space to even break a class up and create another classroom, all those become so there's a lot of totality of circumstances you look at to see what's the most available and realistic option you have with regards to availability. One of the things we are pushing this year is trying to make sure that people understand what has happened in the past is we really are trying to put out a concrete date that we like people to be registered by, so we can actually have a really good idea how many teachers we need. In the past, what I uncovered more so this past year, paying more attention, is we struggle with the dribbling of people signing up for kindergarten, and then it made it really difficult for us to stabilize planning for staffing. Is that a fair statement? And so we're trying to work with, today was a blast out today on social media about signing up and getting registered, because it helps us prepare better to receive the children. It actually is a convenience of a request that makes it better to serve their own children. And we want parents to look at it that way, as opposed to, I'll just get to it when I get to it.
So, yeah, and I think your point about some classes can do just fine with 30 and other classes it would be a disaster. Since I've been on the board, and
let me say this, that was just a hypothetical. Pull a number out. I'm don't anybody what I say. Oh, they're going to go to 30. That was not the point.
I know.
I did it for effect to get it.
I know. What I've learned through the years of being on the board and being in the schools, and just my own experience with my children and talking to a lot of teachers, is that to your point about class size, it really has a lot to do with the makeup of that class than a particular number that we've assigned a guideline to. So, for example, if you have, I know just my own personal experience is at Boyertown years ago. They had a third grade, and it was just this anomaly that 70% of the kids were boys, and so they were large classes, and they ended up putting a bubble class because of the mix of gender. It just wasn't working, and they added that bubble class. So I think to your point, if depending on the makeup of that class and this whole issue with SEL, if you have a handful of kids that have social emotional issues, trauma, whatever, they probably would benefit from a smaller class, and they wouldn't do well in those larger classes. So I just think it's a really tough thing to manage, and I appreciate all the hard work that has gone into this year looking at our staffing and how best we can do it. I know, especially from the middle school model, I think that team approach is really, really effective for students to have that group. And I was concerned when we were talking about not having that anymore, because I think at the middle school especially, it's really valuable for those kids to have a team of teachers that they can work with. So I was glad that we were able to find a creative way to keep that team model, because I think that's important for the education of our middle school students. So I appreciate all the hard work that went into this, and I think that you at least the administration has done their due diligence with trying to be fiscally responsible.
It's okay with you, I was going to thank Dr. Kim, but if you like, we do have.
Is this a comment period?
I haven't gotten to that yet.
Okay,
I wanted to see if there was any further questions while we were discussing. No, it's okay. I guess we can go to the public comment period. Anyone sign? No public comment. With that being said, committee comment?
I think a lot of these changes make a good deal of sense, especially some of the realignment of the special education programs, so that the students follow some of their peer groups to the middle schools. I thought that was an important change that we were implementing. Also, the middle school instructional model. I appreciate the attempt to try to continue what the staff sees as a beneficial model, but also modifying that in a way that we can we don't have to add additional FTEs. Because it's a good route. Because I do think that this was always, we knew with the realignment that there was going to be need for additional staff. I mean, we were moving students between the middle schools as well, which I think kind of got lost in a lot of the discussion about the redistricting. It was good to get the update on the Pine Forge staff. I hope that there is a great deal of care in having those discussions, and some people, working for in R&D for a large pharmaceutical company, we're constantly concerned about where we might be placed or whether we'll still have a job. So I can appreciate the anxiety and concern that comes with being in that situation, especially when you have the emotional connection to student, staff, and your place of work. I do think for some of the new roles, they're repurposing things and assigning supervisory functions that seem like they will be necessary or useful. It would be good. We have the current job descriptions for what they would become. It would be useful to see what some of those, like, separate out, highlight what is the expanded portion of that, so that you can clearly see, here's what they were expected to do and we had them doing more, but here's now what it will be, because we see what it will be, but I don't know necessarily what the difference was. I think you guys did speak to some of that, but it would be good as a board member to have that in front of us. And then I think that was the final thing. Oh, the one other thing, just for a future topic, I think this might be the committee for it at some point. It might be good. There's been discussion from time to time about our class size recommendations, and I think that looking at that, those are for district wide, so it's not necessarily one building or another building, and we've tried to address some of the inequities in the redistricting process. I think it would be valuable as a board member to hear how we arrive at the what our current recommendation is, how often we evaluate that, and what if there would be a change in advance. I mean, personally, I'd love to see smaller class sizes, but obviously there's a number value attached to that. So just having a better understanding of why they are set at what they are would be valuable, and I imagine this might be the right place for that.
I'm not going to repeat everything that Brandon just said, so ditto to what he said. And there was a lot of work that went into this, and I just appreciate it because there's a lot of anxiety and stress. So that's all.
Okay, you always call me because I'm the money person. I think if I added these up right, we're looking at about $35,000 more in the budget, plus benefits, if I did it right. Does that sound right to you?
I have to double check.
Okay.
Your number says 35,000?
Well, close to it. With the various plus benefits. So to get all that, if it's going to make it run smoothly for $35,000, and you said you already have these figures, the new figures, into the budget,
Yes.
so we don't have to look for money.
Yeah.
Are we getting that out of the savings for closing Pine Forge?
Okay.
But you did a lot of work in here. Some of the positions, I don't know, I've been here a long time, and they might have gotten lost over the years, but like, for instance, the guidance counselors, they used to be managed by the HR. Yeah. And there was a lot of things that I don't know how they trained. Years ago, the guidance counselors used to be managed through HR, to the director, the head of HR. And then I think there was a time, I'm not sure about that, it was the CEO. But I'm not sure how all these positions lost a lot of the things they used to do, and with less students. That's what gets me all confused. You know, we got 200 less students now, and HR is looking for a different position there, and to work longer. That's why I asked so many questions, because I want to understand it. And I was trying to think of the gentleman's name, and he used to also write the grants too in HR. And he offered to write them when he left.
Dr. Backen.
That's it, John Backen.
He was the
Well, it doesn't matter. He did it.
He was like the assistant director of pupil services was his title, and he did all the grant writing.
Yeah, he did everything. He did the guidance counselors. He did it all. Okay, thank you.
I don't know who that was, but by that title, that's not HR. That's the equivalent of Mrs. Torsh's position, who this job actually would report to. One of the things I would just say to answer Mrs. Deeroff, I was trying not to call her by her first name. Well, I was trying to be respectful and professional in the meeting. But one of the things I often say and remind is that what happened when I was in school, and I use my example, and what student needs are now has dramatically different. And I think it was really eye-opening. By the way, your analysis is being circulated around Berks County. The fact that we had 40 mandates in the last 10 years that came down, almost in the last 10 years was more than, the most in any other year was 11. I mean, in any decade, excuse me. And that, so those types of things are things that are not just about the enrollment and the number size, it's all the things that we're asked to do. I just for example, what jumps out at you is what we do healthcare-wise in schools that we never did for students. The number of things that has to happen in a school for healthcare-wise, and what students come to school with and the needs they have is dramatically different than what it was when I went to school. And that's some of what I would just ask that we remember. It's not just numbers, it's the type of student we're serving and the needs of the students that we serve. I would probably guess that your special ed population was not at 20 or 21%. I can't remember. I'm doing it from memory what we are back then. So that's just the makeup of the student population is very different. And I will tell you, we're at 25.6 or 25.7 free and reduced lunch also that did not exist. So there's a whole different dynamic of needs and resources that we're trying to address that weren't a part of it. The fact that you have a school police officer, you know, the fact that we have secure entries now, none of that was the case. And I will tell you, I skipped school once in my life and I got caught. So I was not very good at it. It was Miss Dukes across the street who I was dumb enough to walk home down the main street, and she was standing at her door and caught me and said, the neighborhood example, come here, boy, and made me stay at her house until my parents got home. Well, we had more of a community back then. So there's just, my point is there's a lot of difference of what happens in the needs of our school. And quite honestly, some of the behaviors of a small portion of our student population that are high needs and some of their behavior challenges.
Yeah, I don't know, I don't think I shared that with the board. I think I just shared that with you and Brandon, but I'll just do a quick review that from 1949 until 2019, we've had about 80 mandates, and 40 of those mandates came in the past 10 years. Most of them were not funded, which leads to a lot of our present financial difficulties that we're all dealing with, all the school districts, not just us. That's all.
Just had a quick question. How many students do we have in the pre-K program? Because I checked on a bill that we paid, and how long were they in that class? It's just half a day, correct?
Yes.
How many hours do you constitute a half a day for that class?
Mr. Stout handles the pre-K program, but just from our conversations, I can tell you the last time we talked about it, we had about 3 openings, and I believe the classes are capped at 20, and we have 3 classes, so I would say probably about 57 students. They come for a half a day, just like our kindergarten program, which is 2 hours and 40 minutes.
So in 2 hours and 40 minutes, we're given them breakfast and lunch.
That's a mandate. That's part of the grant. We are required to do that. I'm sorry?
Do we do anything else besides have them eat?
We sure do. There's a lot of activity happening, a lot of instructional activity happening there.
And for that, is that $2,222 just for 1 month for breakfast and lunch?
I'm honestly not familiar with it.
That was a bill, that was a question, and that was
Yeah.
the January invoice for their lunch and center.
So it's that much every month? About?
Yeah, and it is part of the grant, and it is
That I wasn't questioning, I know that, yeah. All right, thank you.
Yeah, so I wanted to circle back about some of the ways that school is different now for students. Just because I have children, I have one in elementary, one in middle, and a couple that just graduated from high school. So more children are being diagnosed. So our special ed costs, just the spectrum has become larger. So more children are being diagnosed with special needs, which drives special ed costs. We have school safety concerns now, things like that we did not have when I was in school, which was long enough ago, but not super long ago. So I think that drives a lot of some of the SEL needs, I think, is driven even by that fear of coming to school, and just in general, we know that kids are experiencing higher rates of anxiety, all these things. I think of it as like when you have a child with a speech delay. The earlier you get to the speech delay, the better the child's going to do in the long run. So when we're talking about social emotional needs, the sooner we can get to those needs, the better outcome that child has a chance of having. So I think that by investing in these programs, we're really investing in the future of our children, and we're also, I think there's a possibility that we can save on some security issues, like less disruption to classes and whatnot when children have had that instruction from an early age. So I really think it's super valuable, and I appreciate all the work that went into it. Thank you.
It is getting late, so in lieu of agreeing with everybody. Comment? Oh, I honestly just would like to say, I appreciate the time, the effort, and the detail to the strategy of what is going on. The longer I'm on this board, the more impressed I am. The time and thought that goes into this, running this joint. So, anyway, with that, I'd like to adjourn. Second by Mr.